Years before the crisis hit, neighbors mocked Arjun Patel. Hauling massive frozen blocks from an alpine lake into his subterranean bunker seemed like absolute madness. Neighbors whispered he was losing his mind. Then the municipal reservoirs turned toxic. Suddenly his frozen obsession became the town's only chance at survival. Winter in Oak Haven, Montana was typically a season of hibernation for its residents, a time to retreat indoors and wait out the bitter chill. For 62-year-old Arjun Patel, however, January was harvest time. While his neighbors were huddled around gas fireplaces streaming movies, Arjun was 5 miles up the mountain at Miller's Pond, stepping onto ice that was precisely 32 inches thick. Arjun was a man of intense focus and weathered features, his face lined by years of outdoor labor and deep, solitary contemplation. He wore heavy wool and specialized spiked boots, carrying tools that belonged in a museum rather than a modern garage. Using a massive custom-forged ice saw, he meticulously carved out perfect 300-pound rectangular blocks of solid ice. With a heavy-duty winch mounted to the bed of his rusted 1998 Ford F-250, he hauled these blocks out of the freezing water, droning against the immense weight. His destination was not a commercial freezer, but a massive subterranean cellar he had spent the better part of a decade excavating beneath his property on Birch Road. The cellar was an engineering marvel, heavily insulated with alternating layers of reflective foam, crushed pumice, and heavily packed kiln-dried sawdust. It was a modern adaptation of the ancient Persian yak-chul, designed to keep ice frozen solid through the sweltering heat of August without a single watt of electricity. Most people in Oak Haven thought Arjun was entirely unhinged. Luke Sullivan, a junior reporter for the Oak Haven Tribune, once wrote a mildly condescending feature piece on him titled "The Iceman of Birch Road." Luke had trudged out to Arjun's property in the dead of winter, snapping photos of the older man wrestling with a block of ice as big as a refrigerator. Mr. Port Patel, Luke had asked, his breath pluming in the freezing air. With climate change and modern refrigeration, what exactly is the point of all this backbreaking labor? You know you can buy a bag of ice at the gas station for $2, right? Arjun had paused, wiping a sheen of sweat from his brow despite the negative 10-degree weather. He looked past Luke, staring down toward the valley where the sprawling complex of Apex Chemical Dynamics Corporation loomed near the town's main reservoir. "You trust the grid, son," Arjun had replied, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "You trust the pipes. You trust the men in suits who tell you the water table is perfectly safe while they pump chemical slurry into the bedrock 3 miles away. I don't trust any of them. Water is life, and right now life is hanging by a very fragile, very flammable thread." When Luke's article was published, it became the joke of the town council meeting. Gregory Hayes, the town's ambitious and sharply dressed mayor, had openly chuckled while holding the newspaper up to the microphone. "I think we can all sleep soundly tonight, knowing Arjun Patel has enough frozen pond water to cool our drinks for the next century," Mayor Hayes had declared to a room full of chuckling constituents. But let's return to real business: the expansion permits for Apex Dynamics, which will bring 200 new jobs to our beautiful town. Arjun attended that meeting, sitting quietly in the back row. He didn't argue. He didn't shout. He simply took out a small notebook, jotted down the date of the permit approval, and quietly walked out into the falling snow. He knew something the rest of the town had chosen to ignore. He had spent his career as a geological surveyor before retiring, and he understood the hidden subterranean architecture of Oak Haven better than anyone. The aquifer that fed the town's municipal wells ran directly beneath the porous limestone shelf where Apex Dynamics was building its new subterranean waste containment facility. The corporate engineers claimed their concrete linings were impenetrable. Arjun knew the limestone shifted, cracked, and breathed. He knew it was only a matter of time. So he continued his routine for 4 consecutive winters, Arjun hauled thousands of pounds of pristine, uncontaminated ice from the high-altitude pond, stacking it in his dark, freezing bunker. He layered the blocks with heavy sawdust, sealing the massive steel-reinforced doors behind him. His property became a fortress of timber, earth, and frozen water. His own daughter, Sarah Jenkins, a corporate attorney living in Seattle, called him on his birthday only to beg him to seek psychiatric help. "Dad, you're embarrassing yourself," Sarah had pleaded over the phone. "People are talking. Mayor Hayes called me last week asking if you were a danger to yourself. Please just sell the property and move closer to the city." Fun. "When the taps run dry, Sarah, you make sure you have enough gas in your car to get here," was all Arjun said before hanging up. He didn't hate the townspeople for their mockery. He pitied them. They lived in a fragile illusion of permanence, trusting that turning a metal handle would forever produce clean, life-sustaining water. They were entirely disconnected from the reality of their own survival. And as the final days of Arjun's fourth winter harvest drew to a close, that illusion was about to violently shatter. Summer hit Oak Haven with unprecedented ferocity. By mid-July, an unrelenting, stagnant heatwave had settled over the valley, pushing temperatures into the triple digits for 14 consecutive days. The pine trees turned brittle and brown, and the air hummed with the oppressive sound of cicadas. It was on the morning of July 18th that the incident occurred. There was no explosion, no sirens, no immediate cinematic catastrophe. It started with a quiet, insidious failure deep underground. A micro-fissure in the primary containment fault at the Apex Chemical Dynamics facility, exacerbated by a minor localized seismic tremor the night before, finally gave way. Millions of gallons of a highly toxic, proprietary industrial solvent, a heavy synthetic organofluorine compound, poured directly into the limestone fissures. Within hours, the heavy viscous chemical plummeted straight into the town's primary aquifer. The residents of Oak Haven woke up oblivious. Mayor Gregory Hayes was brewing his morning coffee when he turned on his kitchen faucet to rinse a mug. The water that sputtered out was not clear. It was a thick, iridescent brownish yellow, carrying a chemical odor so sharp and acrid it made his eyes water instantly. Assuming it was a simple municipal pipe burst, Hayes pinched his nose, turned off the tap, and dialed the town's public works director. He couldn't get through. The lines were jammed. Across town, panic was already taking root. Residents who had showered that morning found their skin breaking out in aggressive, burning red welts. Pets who drank from their bowls began vomiting violently. The local emergency room at Oak Haven General was inundated within 2 hours, flooded with screaming children and terrified parents. By noon, the horrifying reality was broadcast across state news networks. Dr. Harrison Miller, the chief hydrologist for the state's Environmental Protection Agency, gave a grim press conference. "The water supply for Oak Haven and the surrounding 50 square miles has been critically compromised," Dr. Miller stated, his face pale and tight. "We are dealing with a Class 1 industrial contaminant. This chemical compound is highly corrosive. Do not drink the water. Do not boil the water. Boiling will only vaporize the solvent and cause severe respiratory damage. Standard home filtration systems, including reverse osmosis membranes, are completely ineffective. The chemical degrades the synthetic filters on contact." The town was instantly paralyzed. The grocery stores were the first to fall. Within 45 minutes of the broadcast, a mob descended on the local Safeway. Tomatoes evaporated. Neighbors who had attended Sunday service together days prior were now violently wrestling in the aisles over plastic shrink-wrapped cases of Dasani and Aquafina. Luke Sullivan, the young reporter, was trapped inside the store, watching in horror as a man in a business suit punched a teenage clerk in the face to secure a 5-gallon jug of distilled water. By nightfall, the shelves were completely barren. The town's reserve water tower had been contaminated as well. Oak Haven was cut off. Mayor Hayes stood in the chaotic emergency operations center set up in the high school gymnasium. He was sweating profusely, his expensive suit unbuttoned and wrinkled. He was screaming into a satellite phone, desperately trying to coordinate with FEMA. "What do you mean you can't get tanker trucks up the pass?" Hayes bellowed, his voice echoing over the din of panicked town officials. "The interstate buckled from the heat wave, Mayor." Mayor Bethedral Dispatcher's voice crackled back, detached and apologetic. "We have a 50-car pile-up blocking the only route into the valley, and the secondary dirt roads are impassable for heavy water tankers. We are organizing a helicopter airlift, but with the regional wildfires drawing resources, it will be at least 72 hours before we can establish a drop zone. 72 hours in 100-degree heat, with no clean water to drink, to cook with, or to cool down." As the reality of their isolation settled over the gymnasium, the room went deathly quiet. A profound primal fear took hold. A human being can survive weeks without food, but only days without water, and in this brutal heat, that timeline was severely accelerated. Dehydration was already setting in for the elderly and the vulnerable. It was then that Luke Sullivan, nursing a bruised rib from the grocery store riot, approached the mayor's desk. He looked terrified, clutching a printout of his own article from 2 years ago. "Mayor," Luke whispered, his throat dry and scratchy. "The lake, Miller's Pond. We can get water from there." Hayes shook his head aggressively. "The EPA just tested it. The runoff from the aquifer poisoned the surface lakes too. It's all toxic. Everything is toxic." "I've heard it's so. I could bow "Not everything," Luke said, sliding the article onto the desk. The headline stared up at them. "The Iceman of Birch Road, Arjun Patel. He's been stockpiling uncontaminated frozen water from the high-altitude pond for 4 years. He has a subterranean bunker full of it. Tons of it. Pure, clean water sealed away from the soil and the pipes." Mayor Hayes stared at the photograph of the old man wrestling the massive block of ice. The man he had openly mocked. The man the entire town had written off as a paranoid lunatic. Suddenly, the massive stockpiles of sawdust and heavy timber didn't look like the ramblings of a madman. They looked like the smartest engineering project in the county. A heavy, desperate silence fell between the two men. The power dynamics of the entire town had shifted in an instant. Paper money, gold, and stock portfolios were utterly useless in Oakhaven now. The only currency that mattered was locked behind reinforced steel doors on a remote, heavily fortified property on Birch Road. Hayes wiped the sweat from his forehead, a dark look crossing his face. "Get your keys, Luke," the mayor ordered, his voice dropping to a dangerous low octave. "We are going to pay Mr. Patel a visit, and we aren't taking no for an answer. How would you like to handle the confrontation between Mayor Hayes and Arjun at the bunker gates in Part 3? Should it escalate to violence immediately or turn into a tense psychological standoff?" Headlights cut through the suffocating darkness of Birch Road, casting long, menacing shadows against the towering pine trees. Mayor Gregory Hayes's luxury SUV, flanked by 2 Oakhaven police cruisers, screeched to a halt at the heavy wrought iron gate of Arjun Patel's property. The air was thick and oppressive, carrying the faint chemical stench of the poisoned aquifer that was currently choking the town below. Hayes slammed his car door, his face flushed with a dangerous cocktail of panic and authority. Beside him, Luke Sullivan clutched his notebook, his hands trembling. Chief of Police Brody Mitchell stepped out of the lead cruiser, unhooking the heavy flashlight from his duty belt. "Open the gate, Arjun," Hayes bellowed, his voice echoing off the timber-reinforced walls of the compound. "By order of the Municipal Emergency Declaration, I am commandeering this property and its resources." Silence answered him. The property appeared deserted, shrouded in the heavy blackness of the rural night. "Brody, get the bolt cutters," Hayes snapped, wiping a thick bead of sweat from his chin. We don't have time for this lunatic's games. People at the clinic are starting to seize from dehydration. Chief Mitchell hesitated, his hand resting on the trunk of his cruiser. Mayor, trespassing on an armed man's property in the middle of a crisis. This could go south very quickly. Let me try talking to him. Before Brody could take a step, a blinding halogen spotlight snapped on from a watchtower built into the roof of Arjun's cabin, pinning the three men in a harsh circle of white light. A heavy mechanical clunk resonated from a hidden PA speaker mounted on the gatepost. "You're standing exactly where I expected you to, Gregory." Arjun's voice boomed through the speaker, distorted but carrying a commanding, chilling calmness. "It took you exactly 14 hours from the contamination event to show up at my doorstep. I won a bet with myself." Hayes squinted into the glaring light, shielding his eyes. "Patel, the town is dying. Apex Dynamics poisoned the well. You have thousands of gallons of clean, frozen water in that bunker of yours. Unlock this gate right now, or I will have Chief Mitchell arrest you for hoarding essential survival supplies during a state of emergency." "Arrest me?" Arjun chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "With what jail, Mayor? The one that doesn't have a drop of clean water for the inmates? The one where your deputies are currently puking up their own stomach lining because they drank from the fountain this morning? You have no authority here. The grid is dead. Your title is a meaningless word printed on toxic paper." "Listen to me, Arjun," Brody intervened, stepping forward with his hands raised in a placating gesture. "It's Brody. We know you warned us. We know we should have listened. But there are kids down there in the valley who didn't vote for those permits. They are suffering. We need that ice. I know you need it, Brody," Arjun replied, his voice softening a fraction. "But I also know what happens if I open those main vault doors. It is 104 degrees outside. If I open the primary insulated seals to let a panicked mob with pickaxes into my cellar, the ambient heat will flood the chamber. The microclimate will instantly collapse. The ice will melt, seep into the earth, and be gone in less than 24 hours. You wouldn't be saving the town, you'd be destroying the only clean water supply within a 50-mile radius." Hayes slammed his fists against the iron bars of the gate. "Then what do you propose, you stubborn old fool?" "We need water now. I propose a system," Arjun stated. "My system. But there's harm. But before we begin, Mayor, I need you to step aside. You brought something with you that doesn't belong to you." Hayes looked utterly confused. He glanced at Luke, then at Brody. "The fourth car in your little convoy," Arjun's voice commanded. "The silver sedan. Bring her up to the gate." Brody turned and jogged back down the dirt road. Moments later, a dusty sedan slowly pulled up beside the police cruisers. The driver's side door creaked open, and a woman stumbled out. She was pale, her lips cracked and bleeding, leaning heavily against the car frame. Arjun's heart, buried beneath layers of hardened cynicism, seized in his chest. It was Sarah. His daughter had ignored his warnings, but she hadn't stayed away. She had driven into Oakhaven the previous afternoon, intending to stage a surprise intervention and drag him back to Seattle. Instead, she had been trapped at the Valley Inn when the highway buckled and the crisis hit. She had mistakenly brushed her teeth with the tap water that morning. "Dad," Sarah rasped, her voice barely a whisper. She looked terrified, clutching her stomach. The heavy iron gate hissed and slowly rolled open on its automated track. Arjun stood on the other side, stepping out of the shadows. He carried no weapon, only a heavy steel thermos and a walkie-talkie. He rushed forward, catching Sarah as her knees buckled, lifting the thermos to her cracked lips. Slowly, Arjun murmured, tipping the icy, pristine water into her mouth. "Just a sip. Let your stomach absorb it." Hayes watched the exchange, his eyes locked on the condensation dripping down the side of the steel thermos. The sight of the cold water triggered a desperate, animalistic thirst in the mayor. He took a step forward. "Stop right there, Gregory," Arjun barked, pulling a small remote detonator from his pocket. The red LED light on the device blinked ominously. Hayes froze. What is that? This, Arjun said, holding the device up, is a dead man's switch connected to the emergency ventilation shafts of the bunker. If you or any of your deputies attempt to breach the cellar doors, I release the button. The thermal seals blow open, exposing the entire ice reserve to the ambient summer heat. Nobody gets anything. You're bluffing, Hayes spat, though his eyes darted nervously to the device. You wouldn't destroy your own supply. Your daughter is here. I have enough water secured in the house to keep Sarah and myself alive for a month. Arjun lied effortlessly, his face a mask of stone. The rest of it is for the town, but it gets distributed on my terms, not yours. If you want this town to survive the next 3 days, you work for me. Hayes clenched his jaw, the reality of his total powerlessness finally sinking in. The mayor of Oakhaven was no longer in charge. The eccentric of Birch Road was now the most powerful man in the county. "What are your terms?" Luke asked quietly, stepping forward with his pen poised over his notebook. Arjun looked at the young reporter. "Write this down, son. The new laws of Oakhaven." Dawn broke over the valley, painting the sky in sickly hues of orange and brown from the distant wildfires. The heat was already stifling by 6 in the morning, but Birch Road had been transformed. Arjun had not slept. Guided by Chief Mitchell and a hastily deputized Luke Sullivan, a barricade of police vehicles had been formed 100 yards down the road from Arjun's gate. Behind it, a line of desperate, sweating townspeople stretched for nearly half a mile. They carried buckets, coolers, thermoses, and empty milk jugs. The Birch Road protocol was ruthless, but brutally efficient. Arjun had spent the pre-dawn hours routing a heavy-duty insulated PVC pipe through a secondary ventilation shaft of his subterranean bunker. Inside the cellar, in the pitch-black, freezing cold, he had set up a specialized melting station. Using a small solar-powered induction heater, he carefully melted the ice blocks one layer at a time, funneling the pure, freezing water out through the pipe to a heavy spigot mounted on his front porch. The inner vault remained hermetically sealed. The massive reserve of ice was safe from the sweltering ambient heat. Rule number 1, no currency. When the first man in line, a wealthy real estate developer named Richard Sterling, reached the spigot, he slammed a heavy gold Rolex and a stack of $100 bills onto the wooden table Arjun had set up. "Fill my cooler," Richard demanded, his voice cracking from thirst. "Keep the watch. Just fill it to the top." A coal cup. Arjun picked up the Rolex, examined it for a moment, and tossed it into the dirt. "Gold doesn't hydrate, Richard. Rule number 1, your money is gathered here. You get 1 gallon per family member per day. If you want more, you earn it." "Earn it?" Richard sputtered. "How?" Arjun pointed toward the perimeter of the property. "I need men patrolling the tree line. The desperate ones will try to cut through the woods tonight to bypass the line. Walk a 6-hour shift on perimeter watch, you get an extra half gallon. Refuse, and you go to the back of the line. Your choice." Richard stared at the old man, then at the dirt, before slowly nodding and taking a heavy wooden axe handle from one of Brody's deputies. "Rule number 2, medical priority. Anyone bringing antibiotics, sterile bandages, or necessary medications for the clinic was granted priority access to the spigot." Sarah, recovering quickly thanks to the clean water, sat beside her father under a canvas canopy, logging the medical supplies as they came in. She watched him with a mixture of awe and profound regret. The man she had called paranoid was operating with the logistical brilliance of a battlefield general. Rule number 3, absolute order. At noon on the second day, a scuffle broke out near the back of the line. 2 men, driven mad by the heat, tried to jump the barricade and sprint for the spigot. Arjun didn't even flinch. He simply reached over and turned the heavy brass valve on the pipe, cutting off the water flow completely. A collective groan of terror washed over the crowd. "The spigot stays closed until those two men are removed from the property," Arjun announced through a megaphone. It didn't take the police to enforce the rule. The crowd, desperate to keep the life-saving water flowing, instantly turned on the rule breakers, physically dragging them back down the mountain. The community had realized that their survival depended entirely on Arjun's strict adherence to order. For 72 agonizing hours, Arjun Patel stood on his porch, dispensing life. He watched the people who had mocked him, the politicians who had ignored him, and the neighbors who had whispered about his sanity, all approach him with lowered eyes and empty cups. He didn't gloat, he didn't demand apologies, he simply filled their jugs, checked their family counts with Sarah, and sent them back into the heat. Mayor Hayes, stripped of his authority and broken by the sheer stress of the crisis, spent those 3 days quietly managing the traffic flow at the base of the hill. He never looked Arjun in the eye again. On the morning of the 4th day, the distinct heavy thumping of rotor blades echoed through the valley. 5 massive CH-47 Chinook helicopters crested the mountain ridge, their undersides slung with enormous emergency water bladders. The military had finally cleared the airspace. Within hours, the National Guard established a massive hydration and medical triage center in the high school football stadium. Tanker trucks began arriving by late afternoon, forcing their way through the cleared interstate. The siege of Oak Haven was over. A week later, the town was forever changed. The federal government seized the Apex Dynamics facility, and a massive criminal investigation was launched against the corporate executives. Mayor Hayes quietly resigned under immense public pressure, slipping out of town in the middle of the night. As for Arjun, he refused all interviews. When national news networks descended on Oak Haven, seeking the Iceman who had saved hundreds of lives, they found the iron gate on Birch Road firmly locked. Luke Sullivan was the only person granted access, publishing a final, definitive article that painted Arjun not as a savior seeking glory, but as a sentinel who simply did what was necessary. Sarah didn't return to Seattle. She quit her corporate law firm, moved into the guest room of the Birch Road cabin, and began helping her father reinforce the subterranean cellar. Winter was only 4 months away, and Arjun Patel had a lot of ice to harvest. Survival isn't just about paranoia, it's about seeing the cracks in the system before they break. Arjun Patel proved that true preparedness requires defying the crowd. If this intense tale of survival and foresight kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling, real-life drama stories. Stay safe and stay prepared.